Chris Johnston joins us on the Jeff Blair Show. All right, Chris. I'll ask the question. 6 years for Nazem Kadri?
What's the question? You don't like that term?
It's a commitment. I mean, I know the guy is, an analytics darling. I don't know how many Leafs fans necessarily view him as being any sort of part of the long-term answer to any of the pressing questions with this team.
Well, clearly, Lou Lamoriello feels he is. Because,
and Mike Babcock too. So we'll bow to them.
Well, no, I'm not saying that, but I mean that's the move signifies. And the one thing about Kadri is Babcock said repeatedly this season that he was the biggest surprise for him in coming here and seeing how competitive he is and how committed he is. And Nazem had a really good year on the defensive side of the game, which I realize isn't always as interesting or as easy to quantify, but he was very good in a number one role, played a lot of minutes, didn't have great offensive line mates, and still, put up reasonable numbers. And, sadly, before you called, it's been the most agonizing 15 minutes trying to figure out the contract term. I mean, the money will be the other part of this to evaluate the deal, but, I personally don't have a problem with it. I think Kadri had a good year and responded pretty well to a challenge from the organization from the year before, when he slept through his alarm and all that stuff.
Yeah, it's kind of funny because I think a lot of people looked at or heard what was being said about him from Mike Babcock and Lou Lamoriello and thought, yeah, okay, this is an organization talking up the value of a player before a trade. I mean, I think, we're sort of naturally skeptical that way. Chris, when did you get a sense that it might have been turning for Nazem Kadri in this city?
I don't remember. I think the game was in December, maybe, but there was a game they played in St. Louis this year, and the Leafs won it. I believe it was December, and he just had a great night. I believe he even fought in that game, but showed really a lot. That's a big bruising team. That's the kind of team, the Blues, that win Stanley Cups, and Nazem, while not being the biggest guy, just showed a certain tenacity, and following that game, the few days after, the way the Leafs guys were talking about him was kind of when I personally got the sense that it wasn't about trying to big him up for a trade or anything like that, and he really has. It's hard because the end of his year is a bit clouded, because he got the diving fines, he got suspended for the last 4 games, but outside of that, I mean, he had a strong season. Even in March, he had a hat trick, he had a 4-point game. I think this guy could be a real impact player if he gets the right line mates, and hopefully the Leafs are, I'm sure, long-term viewing him as a number 2 centerman, and having someone that can play ahead of him down the line. But if the money comes in reasonable, I like this move. I really do.
And again, I know you're trying to come to terms, or you're trying to get details on the financial figures, but I mean, the first thing a lot of people were saying on Twitter, and and again, whether or not you should really read Twitter is another thing, but a lot of people, and understandably, I think their first concern is how will this impact the Leafs' ability to go after a free agent this summer? In other words, how will this impact their ability under the salary cap to go after a guy like Steven Stamkos?
Well, here's the thing about next year is that the Leafs really don't have a lot of cap space. I mean, one of the offshoots of the deals they made, the Phaneuf trade, the trade with Washington, is that they acquired Colin Greening and his salary for next year, Brooks Laich and his salary for next year. Those were good moves for sure, but they're actually going to have to maneuver pretty, one way or another just to be under the cap next year. So I think it doesn't make it impossible, because there's all kinds of things that can happen between then and now, including a buyout window, obviously the draft where potentially they can make some trades. There's ways for them to do it, but I don't see the Leafs, quite frankly, as being well positioned for Steven Stamkos. They are 5 years down the line, but they're not today.
Boy, I'll tell you what. It's as you well know, if this team doesn't at least take a run at Steven Stamkos, I mean, that'll be a tough sell to the fan base. And And I mean, I'm not one of these people that thinks that the Leafs fan base, that they're all sheep and that, they're all sort of blindly wandering around. But if this team doesn't take a run at Steven Stamkos, I think that would be a real shock to this fan base, don't you?
Yeah, it would. And I should be clear. I'm not saying that they won't. It's just that it would be tough for next season. Everything beyond that, I mean, they had a great year in terms of clearing the long-term cap space that was, occupied with Kessel and the Phaneuf deals. But, next year is going to be a challenge. And they've shown themselves to be very creative with handling their cap situation. So there are ways to do it. But, it's going to, as I say, it's not set up right now where I would say, yes, they've cleared the decks here or they've set themselves up, signaling they're going to do that. They're going to have to do some work if they are to sign Steven Stamkos.
Morgan Rielly, the 6-year extension for him really is, I mean, I wouldn't say it's a side story here, but I think most people would be on board with that. It's really remarkable how this kid has developed, isn't it?
Yeah, I mean, very mature young man and someone that, I can understand coming out of his entry-level deal why they're comfortable, giving them this kind of security and basically signaling to them, you're an absolute core member of this team. And in some cases, players coming off their first NHL deal, teams aren't ready to do that for a variety of reasons. But, it makes sense. And the Morgan, to me, still, the sky is the limit for him. We're not entirely sure at this point what he's going to be, what his top end is, but he's still got a couple years here yet to improve and to grow as a player. And, basically what we're talking about with these contracts is gambling, and they're betting that they're going to get him, under the value that they're paying him by giving him that kind of security. And with him, I think that it's a rather safe bet, outside of injuries, because I just think he's really character guy and a very dedicated athlete.
Chris, I'm going to let you run and do some reporting. Thanks for doing this, man.
All right, Jeff. Thank you.